This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
So, you remember last week when I said that I was going to try and find a replacement segment for the Retro Raw report this week? Since there was no episode of Retro Raw to review for this week? Well, I lied. I tried. I scoured Peacock for approximately 15 minutes, thinking of all the different possible shows or documentaries I could review, looking at all the different content and trying to see if there was anything that remotely piqued my interest at first glance. And the short and sweet of it was, I ran out of time. Translation, I got impatient looking. So I just decided, screw it, we're sticking with the SmackDown review this week. But I left myself with a caveat. As punishment, since I failed in my homework assignment of trying to find a second show to report on this week, for some reason I just have this weird mindset of trying to drag these podcast shows out to 2 hours all of a sudden. Well, at least the Friday report. But I decided that since I had a little more free time on Saturday when I sat down to finally watch that show, I said, I'm going to watch that whole 2-hour program from start to finish. I'm going to report on every segment from top to bottom. No matter how abysmal or wretched the content may be, I was going to writhe in my own self-misery regardless of how good, bad, or otherwise, and I was going to make myself watch that entire show from top to bottom. Again, I don't know why I was in the mood to torture myself, but needless to say, bad idea. It was a real come-to-Jesus moment where I actually value the prominence of the DVR function when I normally watch these shows on delay, because by making myself not hit the fast-forward button at any point during that 2-hour show, it actually brought me back to remembering that there used to be a time in my life where I did not have the capability of fast-forwarding through all the bad crap on wrestling shows. I know that's hard to imagine, but think about that for a minute. When I used to watch all those Attitude Era WWF programs, or, Christ, even the dying days of Nitro from back in the day, I watched those live. How? What the hell was I thinking? Can you imagine that there was a point in our lives where we actually had to watch WCW Nitro circa 1998 to 2000 live as it happened? That we didn't have the ability to fast forward through all the horrible crap that was going on during that time? That we actually had to suffer through that in real time? Granted, unless you were recording all of it through your VCR, which, come to think of it, I really wasn't doing much that often. It's hard to imagine, somebody like me that actually likes reliving old content. I really didn't go out of my way to record a lot of those old Attitude Era or late 90s wrestling programs. Partially because a lot of it was shit, and I didn't really want to ever watch half of it again after it was over. But yeah, I watched all of that in real time. Not only that, I did it for the better part of 5 to 6 years straight. So with that prelude out of the way, now that we've set the tone for how the rest of the show is going to go, you guys want to talk about SmackDown? Well, Lord knows I do. The whole kit and caboodle, Daddy. Here we go. Grab some popcorn, kick back, and buckle up. It's going to be a slog, but we're going to get through this report as best we can. And by the power of God's right hand, hopefully we'll come out on the other end without losing any of our hair. Luckily, thankfully, the show at least started off promising. It's Paul Heyman in the ring, and not to be cliche right from the get-go here, but I think we can all universally agree, for those that actually watch the show, this was Paul Heyman doing the Paul Heyman thing. In his typical smarmy, condescending demeanor, he basically spent a few minutes running down Sami Zayn and doing everything to bury the idea that he stands any chance of beating Roman Reigns for the title at the Elimination Chamber, which evidently turns the conversation over to Cody. And this is where I wanted to chime in with some of my thoughts on that promo segment, because it's something a lot of people have been talking about in the last several days. I watched a clip of it on YouTube. Partial clip, that is. It's definitely gotten a lot of praise, and I think it's very much warranted. In essence, it was one of those promo segments that I believe did a great job really blurring the lines between reality and the work distorted aspect of the product. You know, in today's business especially, being able to distinguish what's a work and what's not a work can be really finicky at times. And particularly in the promo world of pro wrestling today, where everybody's smart to the business to some degree, and everyone's throwing insider terms into their material, kind of towing the line between keeping things kayfabe and bringing up real, actual story content. Sometimes the boys can get away with it. Other times it comes off Bush League and try hard. There's a very fine line, and there are very few boys in the business today that can actually pull off distorting kayfabe from reality. It's just kind of the nature of where we are in the business anymore. But that Cody Heyman promo on Monday night was a perfect example of a situation where they pulled back the curtain a time or two, you know, without going overboard and exposing the business in any way. But, you know, especially when they were talking about Dusty, and Heyman was mentioning that Dusty was responsible for sort of being one of the last real masterminds that helped to craft the most recent class of top stars we see in WWE's system today. Whether it's Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch, Bayley, Kevin Owens, even up to including Roman Reigns. And while he didn't explicitly mention his name here, probably for storyline purposes, but Sami Zayn, you can throw Sam into that equation as well, because Dusty was very hands-on with the development of Sammy's career in WWE. And when you really think about it, it's kind of true. When you go back to that old black and gold model of NXT, when it was actually treated as a real developmental system and not Triple H's underground version of PWG or Ring of Honor, Dusty Rhodes was very hands-on with a lot of the top stars you see in WWE today. And you can argue that was really the last time in recent memory where WWE was actually truly successful in generating and crafting homegrown talent from scratch. Some of them may have had a little bit of indie experience prior to signing with the company, be it Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn, but in terms of getting them to adopt the WWE model and learn how to work and wrestle that style, that was really one of the last times that WWE was actually effective in making their own stars from scratch. After Dusty died in 2015, the landscape of the NXT model changed pretty drastically. I know we all like to reminisce about the good old days of the Black and Gold brand, but I don't think it can really be argued that when Dusty wasn't around anymore, Hunter's vision of NXT kind of got shifted over to trying to present a more covert independent wrestling promotion as opposed to a real, authentic, traditional developmental system, a la the way OVW was presented back in the day. It became less about WWE trying to mold and make their own homegrown stars, and it became more about giving the independent wrestlers more of a bigger platform to compete on. And for the guys that worked the indie circuit for all those years and already had an established name and a fan base, they benefited greatly in the short term. But think about it this way too. The guys that Paul Heyman mentioned in this promo with Cody, who are among the names he mentioned? Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch, Bayley, Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns. What does that developmental class go back to? 2010? 2011? 2012? Maybe 2013? I think that even might have been when they were still technically calling it Florida Championship Wrestling. But do you notice how there was no mention of any of Hunter's class of guys that came through the NXT system that we all like to praise till kingdom come? The Johnny Garganos, the Adam Coles, the Tommaso Ciampas, even the FTRs of the world. And as big a fan as I am of a lot of those guys, Gargano not so much, but would you ever try and make a valid argument that those guys ever reached the level of a Seth Rollins or a Roman Reigns in WWE? Absolutely not. Not even close. I mean, in Adam Cole's case, I don't even think he made it to the main roster before he left the company a couple years ago. The other names I mentioned were shoehorned into mid-card purgatory almost immediately. You know, the point I'm getting at with all this is now you see just how instrumental Dusty was during the very early years of NXT when it was actually treated and viewed as a real developmental system. The real early class of guys and gals helped shape the stars in WWE today. And that was all thanks to Cody's dad. But in the case of Cody, he was never that guy. Dusty was so involved in helping Roman to become one of WWE's next generation megastars. All the while, Cody was floating around the main roster for all those years as Stardust and getting booked like a career mid-carder. And there's a lot of truth to be had in that statement because, well, it's true. Go back and watch those mid-2010 Raws and look back at how they were using Cody Rhodes right before he left the company and went to do his own thing on the independent circuit, ultimately before being one of the co-founders of AEW. It's also important to remember this. If WWE doesn't spend all those years intentionally sabotaging and burying Cody Rhodes on television while his own father is helping to craft and create the next generation of top stars, All Elite Wrestling probably would have never happened. You can argue Omega and the Beta Bucks would have tried to kickstart their own project. It would have evidently flopped before it ever had a chance to get off the ground. But Cody Rhodes was a super important key to AEW getting started up. He's not around anymore, but don't ever forget that. That initial core member of the Elite group, Cody was a part of that. Didn't really blend in and fit the system all that well, but he was just as instrumental in getting AEW off the ground as those other guys were. He just saw the writing on the wall quicker and got the hell out of there while he still could. And you could tell it hit home pretty hard when Heyman brought up that ingratiating comment about how one of the last conversations he ever had with Dusty was when Dusty told him that Cody was his favorite son, but at the same time, Roman Reigns was the son that Dusty always wanted. And again, it's one of those shades of gray comments because do I actually believe that Dusty intentionally threw his own son under the bus like that, saying that he would prefer Roman over Cody? No. But can I buy the idea that it's something Paul Heyman would say just to try and get under Cody's skin and play the psychological warfare with him? Oh, absolutely. Both in and out of kayfabe. I mean, we all know how slimy and backhanded Paul Heyman is. He's made a career out of being a lying sack of shit. That's what makes him one of the greatest heels in the history of pro wrestling. So that was a great piece of business. I love the interaction between those two. It came across like a natural conversation between two guys that had plenty of history. And while they both admired each other for the business they conducted together over the years, from a working relationship, when you throw in the archetype of selling everyone on this year's WrestleMania World Title main event, Paul Heyman is the affiliate of Roman Reigns. Therefore, even if he respects Cody's attributes, he's not going to hesitate to make sure that he undermines Cody at every turn. Again, it's the perfect scenario of what's real versus what's a work. And they kind of hit on both ends during that 10-minute promo, or however long it went. And that was just me touching on one key aspect. I mean, I could go on for hours about that promo. It was such a fantastic segment. But, getting back to this promo with Heyman on SmackDown, his main point is to put over the importance of the Universal Championship. And he reflects on one of Cody's closing statements on Monday, saying that he was strictly aiming to win championships and everyone's given him a hard time for it. But now it's personal between him and Roman. But Heyman stresses the fact that the Universal title is more than just a championship. It's the symbol of relevancy for everybody in the bloodline, up to and including Heyman himself. And while he's going off on establishing the island of relevancy, or whatever his newest catchphrase is, here comes Sami Zayn in the back door to one of the biggest nuclear babyface reactions of the entire year. And while I can't say that the interaction between Heyman and Sammy was as good as the stuff with Heyman and Cody on Raw, Sammy kind of laid the groundwork for what the future holds in store for the bloodline. He says the walls are crumbling down in front of Roman as we speak, and it's only a matter of time before his entire family walks away and leaves him to fend on his own. No Jimmy, no Jay, no Solo. They're all going to leave him to hang out and dry. He says that Roman has approximately 8 days left as Universal Champion. Because of the Elimination Chamber, Sammy is walking out with the gold. At which point, Heyman holds his hand out so he can respond. Sammy basically pulls Heyman in for a hug, and he says that Roman doesn't need to worry about Cody at WrestleMania. And my final note for this segment reads, if I actually bought for a split second that Sammy has any chance of leaving the Elimination Chamber with the title, I would also say this was a 5-star promo segment. Unfortunately, I think we can all kind of see the writing on the wall where that's going. Now again, it doesn't mean Sammy can't be factored into something big involving the bloodline heading into WrestleMania. There's still the possibility of him and Owens going after the Usos for the tag titles, and I think it would still be a good storyline payoff for all the stuff they've done with him and Jey Uso on TV. But it does make me curious to see how they go about booking that finish with Roman and Sammy. We talked about it at the end of last week's SmackDown report, how they've really wedged themselves into a corner right now with trying to present two high-profile world title programs at the same time headed into WrestleMania. Like, the Roman-Cody storyline has always been the long-term plan, and it makes all the sense in the world to have Cody be the one to finally dethrone Roman for the belt. But the Roman-Sammy storyline, you can argue, it's kind of the hotter program right now. Given how they just blew off Sammy's split from the bloodline and how the crowd is receiving Sammy as a babyface. Like, if they just wind up beating Sammy flat at the Elimination Chamber and then it's on to Roman and Cody at WrestleMania like that was nothing, is the crowd going to respond to that well? The problem is that if they have Sammy lose and they don't give him any kind of outing, what happens if the people hijack the actual Cody-Roman match? I'm not saying it's likely to happen, but we've seen bizarre situations like that occur in WWE. We all remember the Bryan Danielson story, and it practically handcuffed them into going back on their initial plans because the fans were not going to accept any other outcome aside from Bryan Danielson becomes world champion. There was no alternative. In that given moment, they basically tied WWE's hands behind their back. And, thinking about the way they actually conducted that whole program, I guess there is the possibility of them always going the three-way route at WrestleMania if things really get out of control and the fans revolt if Sammy isn't factored into the main event of WrestleMania somehow. Roman versus Cody versus Sammy. I mean, I'm not trying to encourage them to go that direction, but I mean, as much as I detest multi-man matches in wrestling, as you'll come to find out later on in the show, at least that one would sort of make sense, at least as a last resort. But maybe we'll have that conversation for after the Elimination Chamber because we don't even know how they're going to book that match yet. But it's such an interesting scenario, man. They're still a couple months out from WrestleMania, but there's so many different options that can go with that storyline. And the great part of it is I have no idea what they're going to do. But it's one of the most captivating things I've seen WWE do in a long time on television. That entire bloodline story from beginning to end. It's impeccably done. But I've spent enough talking about that opening segment. So let's move on with the rest of this train wreck. And brace yourselves for this one. Because you want to talk about train wrecks. Ain't nobody on the show more perfectly exemplifies that than Hit Row. In WWE's continual effort to expose just how fucking appalling Top Dollar is, the match is Hit Row versus Drew McIntyre and Sheamus. And I think I finally figured it out. After all these months, I have now determined what they mean by banger. I believe it is a synonym for hideously rotten professional wrestling. Because that's exactly what this segment was. Good God in heaven. Again, I want everybody to remember this. Y'all want to talk about how great the black and gold brand model of NXT was back in the day. Think about this. While Dusty Rhodes was helping to develop stars like Roman Reigns and Becky Lynch and Sami Zayn, Triple H was spending several years trying to make Hit Row a fucking thing. Remember that. Who actually has the eye for talent? Ashante the Adonis is green, but he's at least somewhat of an athlete and can actually do some of the basics. Top Dollar, I don't even think he would rank among the 10 best workers in GCW. Joey Janela would look like fucking Ricky Steamboat working a match with Top Dollar. And BFAP, I don't even know what her story is still. I don't think I've ever seen her actually wrestle. Lord knows I ever want to see it, judging the talent pool surrounding her. I don't even think it's fair to call this a squash match. This was just an outright burial. This was Triple H recognizing how badly he fucked up in re-signing these Hit Row dorks. So he just said, you know what, Drew, Sheamus, go out there and steamroll these guys in 2 minutes. That's exactly what they did. Top Dollar took some outlaw-looking bumps, never tagged in a single time, and Ashante got whipped around the entire time and beaten with a bro kick at the end. This is what we like to coin, using insider terms, a burial. Absolutely warranted, because Hit Row sucks. But it also does call into question the obvious. If the idea is that we're all supposed to be clued into the fact that Hit Row sucks, from the announcers mentioning it on commentary to the way they're being booked on TV, if their entire endgame is to remind us every week, these guys suck, why not just fire them? I mean, no, think about it for a minute. You know they suck. I know they suck. Everyone with 2 brain cells to rub together know these people fucking suck. So why keep them around? Just cut them. Stop wasting your money. Quit paying them. Tell them to go pursue a career in music production or something of that nature. Get them the fuck off of television and the professional wrestling business for that matter. Be done with it. Why is that so hard? Like, it's obviously a rib by keeping them on TV anyway, so you're just going to wait for one of them to break a leg or hang themselves in the ropes again like Top Dollar almost did several weeks back? I mean, I know it's fun watching them get exposed for being lousy at their jobs, but is it really worth risking seeing them injure either themselves or somebody else in the process? Wouldn't it be better to just forget they ever existed and move on? I mean, I know we live in the generation where everybody tries to justify contracts, but come on now. I mean, there's no redeeming quality about them. They're just completely useless as human beings. So get rid of them. I don't know. Maybe I'm just thinking about it too much. Well, in the meantime, I guess we can all look forward to Sheamus and McIntyre versus the Viking Raiders next week. And one of the pre-tapes that I tormented myself by sitting through, Von Holla, Ivar, and Dunderhind did some bad acting with fire, and I don't know. I think they challenge Sheamus and McIntyre next week. Cool. I totally forgot the Viking Raiders were a thing on this show. Must be more of Hunter's guys. So after this, we had Jimmy Uso calling his brother in the back to try and confirm his location, factoring that they have a tag team title defense for later on. Must have been caught in traffic or something. Then coming back from the break, in another textbook case of why scripted segments are always death TV in wrestling, Karrion Kross and Scarlett recited some very rehearsed verbiage regarding the Fatal 4-Way for later on. Here's what I got out of it. Something about Kross promising to put Rey Mysterio down, because that feud is still going on apparently. And every time I see Karrion Kross in his perfectly combed hair, it makes me long for the days in NXT when he was actually bald and looked somewhat menacing on camera. Now he looks like the next sponsor for Bosley's hair restoration. Before photo, we have bald, scary, intimidating Karrion Kross. Now in 2023, we have full head of hair, perfectly groomed Karrion Kross. His hair is beautiful, by the way. Going back to the ring, once again, forcing myself to watch this entire show and not skip over anything. My punishment for not finding a replacement segment for the Retro Raw report. So, of course, WWE throws it directly back in my face by subjecting me to the following match. Lacey Evans versus Carmen Harris? No idea if I'm pronouncing that name right. Probably some local girl they brought in because I never heard of her before. She, Actually, you know what she looked like? You guys old enough to remember the Strawberry Shortcake cartoons? Picture one of those characters, but she's a redhead. That's what Carmen Harris looked like. And albeit I have not been all that observant of Lacey Evans' most recent incarnation on WWE television, since the time I began watching her back in NXT, she's gone through about 17 gimmick repackages. She's flip-flopped between face and heel more times than the Big Show. And during all that time, I do not believe her wrestling has ever gotten any better. She did some very sloppy-looking basics in here. The crowd was dead quiet for a lot of it. And probably in one of the best WTF moments of all time, she gives the job girl a stiff knockout punch. Apparently they're still calling it the women's right, which is just beyond fucking cringe. After which she got down and applied a Cobra clutch onto the job girl, but not before stating, and I believe this is a direct quote, "Salute me, you nasty things." I believe that was intended to be directed toward me, the viewer. Salute me, you nasty things. She apparently ran out of words in the dictionary to come up with. So she settled with things. I feel insulted. But more reasons to validate why I skip over most of the girls' content in wrestling. Moving along, Jimmy Uso is still worried that Jey Uso is no-showed. Paul Heyman is still a phenomenally great weasel, and I'm going to be incredibly disappointed when the bloodline is no longer a thing on this show. Then we had more hideously bad acting in the back. This time it was Adam Pearce, Sonya Deville, and Chelsea Green, who I guess is apparently officially signed with the company. So I guess it's only a matter of time before they start having her show up on SmackDown every week in a disheveled wedding gown, acting like a deranged psychopath every week. In the meantime, though, I guess she's going to be whatever her current gimmick is at the moment, a whiny Karen who constantly bitches at HR because people hurt her feelings. Yeah, that's bound to get over. And her and Sonya were going to team up later on. Yippee. More bad girls wrestling for me to cover. Can't fucking wait. Then we had the tag team title showdown with the Usos defending against Brawny the Strowman and Ricochet. What we were led to believe was going to be a 2-on-1 handicap situation with the heel, Jimmy, defending his half of the SmackDown tag title on his own. Although I can confirm I'm not entirely sure if the Usos are supposed to be heel. It's very hard to tell these days with the way people react to characters. I'm pretty sure Strowman and Ricochet are supposed to be babyfaces, so why they seemed perfectly okay going up against a heel champion at a team advantage, I have no idea. Makes it kind of hard to want to boo the heels when they're fighting at the disadvantage. Luckily for us, the other heel partner, Jey Uso, showed up. And you'll be surprised to hear this, to a massive thunderous ovation. Because, you know, that's what the crowd is supposed to do when the heel partner shows up for a match at the last minute. The crowd cheers the bad guy for evening the odds. I don't know what the fuck's going on anymore. Wrestling is so goddamn stupid anymore. So here comes Jey Uso, coming in to embrace and hug his brother and let it be known that he's alive, apparently. And again, when you remove the fact that I have no idea who I was supposed to cheer or boo in this given scenario, and the fact that modern wrestling psychology is fucked up 6 ways from Sunday, It was a very good tag match. The random makeshift pairing of Ricochet and Strowman as a team is still very weird to me. But that is another one of those modern wrestling things where you take two guys you have nothing for creatively and you just decide one day, fuck it, let's put them together as a tag team. So, challengers were in control very early on. The Usos ended up cutting off Ricochet for the Heat. At least I think it was the Heat. Again, hard to tell because the crowd isn't really booing Jimmy or Jay at any point. But Strowman got to run wild momentarily and plow over the champs. Ended up getting cutting off with a super kick on the floor from Jay. Jay then hit a big crossbody dive for a very close near fall onto him. Pretty soon, Ricochet got to tag back in and get a brief flurry of offense rolling. They ended up hitting the double team move where Strowman launches Ricochet off of his shoulders into a senton. But that only resulted in a 2 count. And for probably the first time since we've seen Strowman try and execute this, you know the spot he does where he'll do the full lap around the ring and then shoulder block the guy into oblivion, and the guy taking it will oversell it to the point of absurdity? Well, finally, after years of Braun Strowman doing this move, somebody finally thought to themselves, I've got the perfect counter for the shoulder block. I'm just going to move out of the way and let nature take its course. Naturally, wouldn't you know what happened? Strowman goes out of the ring. He begins to charge full speed at Jey Uso. And Jey Uso, seeing this coming, moved out of the way. And Strowman went ass over tea kettle, torpedoing over the desk. Huh. Who would have ever thunk it? All it took was one guy to come up with the idea of moving 2 steps to their right. And that was enough to counter Braun Strowman's ridiculous shoulder block spot on the floor that always looks so fucking trashy to begin with. Genius. Absolutely fucking genius. And in one of the more ludicrous finishes you will probably ever see, after Ricochet goes up and hits a shooting star press onto Jimmy, he then takes a forward flip bump onto his back so that he can then land in perfectly prone position so that Jey Uso can hit him with a diving splash for the pin. I wrote down, that looked awesome in execution, but Jesus H. Christ, was that not the most goddamn phoniest thing you've ever seen? Like, come on now. Seriously. The hell was that? Stupid. Absurd. Equally as absurd, and again, hilarious at the same time, the follow-up segment after the break where the Usos are in the back and Paul Heyman is conspicuously hiding behind a pillar. He's eavesdropping on the conversation between Jimmy and Jay, just hanging out in the frame. And I really forget what happened here. I know that Jay eventually walked off. I think Jay was trying to confirm whether or not Jay was still part of the bloodline or something like that. So Heyman walks over. He asks Jimmy, is everything all right with Jay? And Jimmy confirms that everything's all good in the hood. And Heyman actually responds by saying the word yeet. I want you to all picture in your mind the idea of Paul Heyman addressing Jimmy Uso with yeet. I know you cracked a smile. I did too. So from there, directly from the penthouse to the outhouse again, We had more girls' content to trudge through, which evidently in turn meant more bad acting. This time, it featured Shayna Baszler, the returning Ronda Rousey, and Natalia's bulbous breasts. First, Natty reminded us of when Shayna broke her nose a few weeks back, which I had completely forgotten about until the moment she brought it up. She called Shayna a bootleg knockoff Ronda Rousey, and when Shayna came out to put over her credentials, in very scripted WWE delivery, here comes Ronda Rousey to confront both girls, and when Shayna teases that she's going to hold Ronda back, she then turns around and cold cocks Natty in the jaw and lays her out. And while the heat beatdown's going on, here comes Shotzi's green hair to try and run in to make the save. Guess she decided to leave the tank in the back this time. To when she gets in the ring, she delivers some horrible fake-looking punches and kicks to the heels. I wrote down indie level bad. And then the heels just turn around and beat the shit out of her too and leave her for dead. I concluded my notes for this segment by writing, worst baby faces ever. This is also shit. What was not shit, however, was the next segment with Jey Uso and Sami Zayn, with Sammy letting Jey know that in just 8 short days, Roman's going down. And even though Jey's been through everything with the bloodline, even Sammy knows, on a deep level, Jey wants to see Roman's empire fall too. And Sammy wants him to know that he doesn't have to go down with the ship. He was very thankful for what Jey did at the Royal Rumble, and if he doesn't get the chance to meet with Jey in person from now until the Elimination Chamber, Sammy wants Jey to know that he acknowledges him. Of course, everybody in the building blows a gasket over it, because as much as we all want to see the evident clash with Roman and Sammy for the title, the real payoff in the Bloodline storyline is seeing Jey Uso help out his boy Sammy. We're all waiting for the moment where Jey comes to his senses and finally walks away from the Bloodline under his own volition. And the stuff with him and Sammy has been so great on television. It's great stuff. And it's all part of the next step in the slow burn fall of the Roman Empire. See what I did there? Good stuff. Good stuff. They should pay me to write that shit. I would gladly take the paycheck. And then I would phone it in the minute they gave me the first script to write. But in completely unrelated news, LA Knight is still alive, apparently. Yeah.
Let me talk to you.
He's basically informing us that the Mountain Dew pitch black stuff is behind him, as is Bray Wyatt. He's looking to the future and pretty much acknowledges the quiet part out loud. That being that even LA Knight recognized how fucking brutal that program was. And whereas under normal circumstances, I would probably bitch and complain that LA Knight was totally no-selling any of the effects of getting elbow dropped through a staging area and potentially burnt with all the flames that were engulfing him at the time. The more I try and relive the absurdity of that whole thing, it's probably best to just take the approach that LA Knight did in this segment. Forget about it, pretend that Bray Wyatt stuff never happened, and just try to move on from it as quickly as possible. Yeah. By the way, I also did note, no physical appearance from Bray Wyatt this week. Hopefully they keep it that way. I very much wish I could pretend the next segment didn't happen, but once again, we're in it for the long haul this weekend. So as penalty, I got to experience Sonya Deville and Chelsea Green versus Liv Morgan and Raquel Velasquez Alvarez Martinez Rubio III. And boy, was it an experience. So, well, where would you like me to begin? How about the notable botches, such as Liv Morgan completely eating shit trying to do a leapfrog attempt over Sonya out of the corner where she just fell down? Or probably in one of the dumbest finishing sequences I've ever seen in my entire life, where Raquel plants Chelsea with a one-arm powerbomb, only to then flip her up to her feet, so Chelsea could then stand in prone position near the ring ropes, so that Liv couldn't conveniently hit her stupid fucking Oblivion finisher, which I can't believe she's still doing. Or how about the totally ludicrous finish where Raquel hoists up Liv into a powerbomb position so that she can then powerbomb her own tag partner onto Chelsea, somehow not harming Liv in the process, even though she just got powerbombed spine first onto another human being. Somehow, Chelsea was able to cushion the landing entirely so that Liv could just pin her. Didn't hurt Liv, but practically killed Chelsea Green. Oh yeah, and Chelsea Green, you know, the new girl on the block that they just allegedly signed a new contract to, beaten clean in her debut TV match. Superb signing. Just great stuff, guys. Can't applaud it any better if I tried. I am glad to see that you will get plenty of ROI with Chelsea Green in WWE. I bet Matt Cardona is looking on proud to see his wife get used like a complete schmuck. I also like the idea of Sonya and Chelsea getting booked as a team, and in their first match together, they're already doing the miscommunication spots. This also sucked a cock. As did Riddick Moss and Emma's promo in the back to hype up Moss for the Fatal 4-Way main event. Also still completely unexplained, why are Emma and Moss a couple for no reason? Did they ever explain how that came to be or why Emma all of a sudden got the hots for Riddick Moss? Beyond the fact that he looks great and has abs. I mean, I guess for most women out there really isn't much of an explanation beyond that in most circumstances. Does the guy look like Giga Chad? Good enough for me. I'll take him. He's going to ditch me for another hot chick the next day anyway, but at least I get to fuck him for one night. It's the modern dating market for you. Stay single. It's a life lesson to take away from me. But moving past that, we had a sit-down with Michael Cole and Charlotte Flair, and they're basically running down the entire 3-year history between Charlotte and Rhea Ripley, talking about how it was 3 years ago when Rhea met Charlotte at WrestleMania for the first time, and at that point, she was green, inexperienced, and was not on Charlotte's level, so Charlotte beat her. She also methodically left out the word buried. Just thought I'd throw that out there for substance. And, well, she basically just promised that she was going to bury her again this year. Oops, I mean, beat her. Not bury her, but defeat her in a very competitive professional wrestling match. And while the jury is still out on whether or not Charlotte is actually going to do the job, I will say I was incredibly distracted during this promo because even though the delivery was not horrible or anything from Charlotte, I also couldn't help but get distracted by the fact that while she's doing this promo, she also has to hold the women's title on her shoulder in very WWE-like fashion, where it's like perfectly positioned for the camera and just looks artificially placed. Again, I know it's WWE, it's something I should just be used to by now, but it was incredibly distracting. Beyond that, I really didn't get much out of the interview. Charlotte sucks. Michael Cole looks grayer and grayer the more I see of him on camera, and I hope to God Rhea goes in there and smashes through Charlotte in like 30 seconds. It'll never happen, because WWE is bound by law to prop up Charlotte as the greatest fucking thing since sliced bread. But as long as Rhea beats her at WrestleMania, I'll be content. So then we mercifully come to the main event. And God damn it. Wouldn't you know it? It's a four-way. Urgh. They're just begging for me to jump off a roof, aren't they? Now, at this point in the show, they were daring me, pleading with me to just end it all, to put myself out of my misery. Well, I made it this far in the program without having a heart attack. If I can sit through 2 lousy girls' matches, surely I can suffer my way through a multi-man match. Won't be easy. Dogs will be punted. Walls will be punched. But by golly, we're going to fucking get through this thing if we have to gouge our eyes out in the process. So it's Karrion Kross, Madcap Moss, Santos Escobar, and Rey Mysterio, with the winner advancing to face Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship. I believe they said on next week's show in Montreal. Okay. Like, why? Shouldn't they be trying to sell the Elimination Chamber show? Wouldn't it just be smarter to just make this a number 1 contenders match for the premium live special? I don't know. Whatever. And while there were periods with multiple guys in the ring doing spots at a given time, for the most part, it kind of followed the same formula a lot of these multi-man matches go. 2 guys are in the ring trading moves for a while. The other 2 guys are sitting outside the ring waiting their turn to get involved, and they just kind of repeat the cycle until the big schmoz at the end. By far, the best worker in this by a country mile is Rey Mysterio, who, by the way, is currently 48 years old. Meanwhile, he's in there wrestling circles around most of these juggernauts. There was a point where Kross was in there working with Moss, and you could audibly hear him yell the word, "Spine Buster!" to the top of his lungs. When you know it, Moss gave him a spine buster. That was fucking brilliant. Right out of the playbook of Jonathan Felix Anthony Cena, blatantly calling spots in the middle of the match and not even trying to hide it. Thanks for that one, John. You really rubbed off on the boys the right way. So eventually it broke down into the big 4-way with everybody. Rey gives Kross a 619, but gets tripped up by Scarlett on the ring apron, and he ends up eating a clubbing blow to the back of the head. So he ends up giving Moss a forearm to the jaw, so Escobar could then run in and take Kross out. They attempted to do the double tumble spot over the top rope, but Kross just sort of, didn't go over. So he just kind of rolled out to the floor. And then Moss, the one that sounds like Kross, Madcap, yeah, he hit the Macho Man elbow drop and pinned, of all people in the match, not Karrion, not Escobar, but Rey. The one guy that is currently being factored in for a big WrestleMania match with Dominic. More than likely. Hasn't been confirmed yet, but I mean, you can kind of see where they're going with that layered story. Yeah, they beat that guy. Clean. Wonderful. So yeah, that was my reward for having sat through almost 15 minutes of this debauchery. A clusterfuck four-way main event with guys doing a bunch of choppy-looking spots. Also, they could get to the end and give the win to Madcap fucking Moss, the former flunky of Baron Corbin. Fucking Christ. So guess what we have to look forward to for next week? Gunther versus Madcap Moss for the Intercontinental Championship. Woo! Sounds absolutely riveting. So that was SmackDown. And there's quite the life lesson to be taken away from all this, ladies and gents. Don't watch SmackDown. That's the lesson. Or at least if you do, be forewarned. It could be toxic to your overall health. God. You know, I think I talked about this before when we were doing apples to oranges comparisons and talking about what separates AEW from WWE. Like, both shows suck a dick every week. The problem with WWE is that it's just plain bad. There are no redeeming qualities to any of the bad shit that gets booked on that program. You know, at least AEW makes me kind of laugh with all the dumb crap that goes on every week. That's at least train wreck level entertainment on some level. WWE, I can't even vindicate the bad stuff because I don't even get a laugh out of it most of the time. It's kind of sad, actually. There's just like no way it bypasses train wreck bad and just becomes awesome by comparison. It just blows. But at least we now know going forward. I will be applying the regular standard model when it comes to the reviews of our Friday Night SmackDown endeavors. I'm going to watch the stuff that interests me or catches my eye, and I'm going to either skip or very quickly gloss over any of the other filler crap in between. Because quite frankly, it really doesn't deserve my attention. Much like the majority of this SmackDown did not warrant my attention this week. But that's what you get when WWF Retro Raw in 1994 is preempted by the Westminster Dog Show. We turn around this week and sit through an entire 2 hours of absolute garbage modern wrestling. But in completely unrelated news, the Elimination Chamber is happening next weekend. And I'll be very interested to see what they end up doing with that Roman Reigns Sami Zayn title match. The rest of the card, I could take or leave, honestly. I'm not even going to try to do any kind of preview predictions for that show because that kind of implies that I really care about anything else that's happening on that show aside from Roman and Sammy. So we'll just kind of observe from the sidelines and talk about everything after the fact. Maybe there will be a surprise or two. Who knows? Until the Friday show, where we'll be back, hopefully to talk about some actual good wrestling content. As much fun as it is ripping into modern wrestling and talking about how bland and god-awful it usually ends up being, this one was quite the slog. So we'll cross our fingers and hope and pray maybe Dynamite can make up for a lost cause on Wednesday. Good start would be by getting Mark motherfucking Briscoe on that show. But that might be asking a little too much from the all-knowing God Booker Tony Khan. Because Lord knows, probably don't have enough time to fit in Mark Briscoe for a quick squash. Because we got to get 789 other characters over that nobody gives a shit about. But that'll be for the Friday show, then we can bury that show into oblivion. For next Monday's show, we will prep ourselves for the Elimination Chamber and Retro Raw reports. That'll be another case where we'll kind of leave SmackDown up in the air. Depending on how much of it is old news by the time Monday rolls along, we may just kind of touch on a couple key segments, and elsewise we'll mostly spend time talking about the Elimination Chamber and all the fallout that stems from that. Maybe even do a little bit of a WrestleMania preview and talk about the foreseeable card that we can kind of see for that two-night event. Because we're going to need to fill that show with something. Hopefully it'll actually feature some real high-caliber main event level matches. But until Friday, take care, everybody. Peace out.